All right, welcome back, everyone. Good morning again for those of you that are just now joining us. My name is Holly Mays. I use she, they pronouns, and I work for the Department of Associated Students as the Assistant Director of Governmental Affairs. And before I introduce our facilitators, I would like to introduce your Internal Vice President, B. Schaefer, to introduce herself, if you're ready, B.
Hi, everyone. I'm B. Schaefer. I would like to make a statement on behalf of the AS President, EVPLA, and Student Advocate General. I would like to welcome you all to this training session. The following curriculum supports our vision for the 2021-2022 academic year and the knowledge we find essential for the association as we start fall quarter. Please note that these training sessions are a portion of the information you will be required to learn as per legal code. Please take this time to be an active participant by engaging with your fellow peers. We look forward to serving you. Thank you all. I'll pass it back to you, Holly.
Thank you so much. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Sven and Monique from the CARE office. I won't share too much. I'll just bounce it over to you to introduce yourselves, but thank you so much for being here. And just as a gentle reminder to everyone participating today to please engage with the topic at hand with care and respect for one another and consideration of the topics that we're covering today. So thank you so much for joining us. And now to you, Sven and Monique.
Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. I hope folks are doing well wherever you are located in the world. You could be somewhere in the afternoon and the evening. Really excited to be here today to provide y'all with some sort of a training. We have been doing a lot of trainings virtually, but some of them have actually started to transition to in-person. And it's really exciting to be able to see all the students actually moving in to campus as we speak. As I was driving into campus, I saw so many different parents and just students being dropped off. It's a really exciting time. I love the energy of the beginning of an academic year, and yeah, just really excited to be here. And yeah, Monique, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. Go ahead, Monique.
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Monique Plummer. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Prevention Education Coordinator with CARE. I've been with CARE for about a year now, so my year anniversary was on the 9th. So still have a lot to learn, but I'm very excited to be presenting to you all about CARE, what we do, and hopefully I can work with some of you all, if not all of you all, during the academic year.
And before we begin, we just want to offer folks a little bit of a content warning. So today we are going to be talking about interpersonal violence and creating different trauma-informed spaces. And so Monique and I would just ask that you all take care of yourselves, however that may look. And if it means that you need to get up and need to go stretch, you need to step away from the computer, you need to grab some water or grab something to eat real quickly, please feel free. We want you all to be your best selves and to take care of yourself. And so however that may look, please do so. And then I will also post this into the chat. This is information on CARE and a little bit of our resources. So we'd like to start our training today with land acknowledgement to the land that UCSB is upon, as well as the land that we all may inhabiting if we are not here at UCSB at this moment. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this place and all land upon which we are located, and pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and the culture of this area, which has become a place of learning for people from all over the world. We honor the Chumash people in their rightful place on this land that has been taken from their community as a way to acknowledge the pain, suffering, and violence that the land and its people have experienced and continue to experience. These acts of violence against the Chumash people have roots in the same power and control dynamics that cause the interpersonal violence CARE works to eliminate daily. And because of this interconnected violence, the liberation from sexual assault, relationship violence, stalking, and harassment will be tied to the liberation from racism and racial violence and the erasure of cultures such as the Chumash people have experienced. We honor their experiences alongside the survivors we work for each day.
Okay, so I did paste in the chat the link to the Native Land California website for folks that might not be currently located in Santa Barbara. So now we're going to do a centering activity. So this activity is going to be a 60-second, so a 1-minute deep breathing exercise. So if you can, find some place where you can sit comfortably, maybe on the floor, on your bed. If you want, you can sit at your chair and then have your feet firmly planted on the floor, and then just follow the prompts along with the prompts for the video.
And if I could just get a thumbs up to make sure that folks can hear it.
Locate your diaphragm by placing one hand on your stomach just above your belt. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Feel your diaphragm move under your hand as your belly expands. Exhale slowly while pulling your stomach muscles in towards your spine. Relax. Inhale slowly through your nose. Exhale slowly out through your mouth. Again. Inhale slowly. And exhale. Continue these deep breaths. If you feel this more in your chest, you are probably taking shallow breaths. On your next inhale, focus on expanding your belly and inhaling air deep into your lungs. Locate your...
So real quickly, we just wanted to offer folks a little bit of an overview as to what we're going to be covering this morning. And so we're going to give everyone a CARE overview on the services and the education that we provide through CARE and all the different resources that are available for anyone who is reaching out for advocacy services. Monique and I are going to get into a little bit of what is interpersonal violence and the different warning signs that you might notice, especially as a bystander. Creating trauma-informed spaces. So how can we all create different trauma-informed spaces for your meetings, for your classrooms, for maybe even commissions or different committees and all the different aspects that go with that. And then lastly, we're going to kind of get into about the different engagement opportunities that you can engage us with throughout the academic year. There's a few things that are going on system-wide with the UC system, with some of our CARE offices, as well as the UCOPS community safety plan. We'll get into a little bit more of that, but just other engagement opportunities that are available throughout this year for everyone on this call. And I also just remembered, I never actually really introduced myself. I'm so sorry. So hi, everyone. I'm Sven Runman. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Prevention Education. So CARE, who are we? What do we do? So the mission of CARE and our primary purpose is to work with survivors who've experienced interpersonal violence. And so that could be an overarching term for sexual assault, relationship violence, and stalking. We host campus-wide educational programs, trainings, and prevention education, similar to what you all are receiving at this moment. The CARE program, we work with students who've been directly impacted or indirectly impacted. So that could be folks that are supporting a survivor. And so that could be a loved one, it could be a parent, it could be another friend or even a roommate. And we work to train and educate students, faculty, and staff on how to respond appropriately when somebody may share an experience that they have experienced. And so we offer three different things: direct services, so our advocacy services, which we'll get into in a second, prevention education, which is the work that Monique and I do, then training, which is also something that we do for staff and faculty throughout campus. So what is advocacy? So care advocates are here to provide options to a survivor who has experienced interpersonal violence. Our confidential advocates explain students' rights and options, including the option to not report. And our advocates understand that every experience is unique, and we support survivors in making the decisions that are right for them when navigating all the different resources and options that we have available for them. And our advocates like to use the empowerment model, which means that they believe that survivors are the best ones to be making decisions for themselves, and that ultimately their role as an advocate is really to help provide that guidance and support throughout the needs of that survivor. What is confidentiality? I think this is one of the biggest questions that Monique and I often get whenever we provide trainings or any sort of education program. So care advocates, we provide free and confidential support to anyone that is indirectly or directly impacted by interpersonal violence. And so confidentiality essentially means that someone can speak with an advocate privately about those rights, resources, and options without reporting the incident to the university or law enforcement. And this provides survivors a safe space to be able to talk with someone and get whatever kind of support that feels best for them. And so real quickly, we have like a list of some short FAQs. So can someone speak to an advocate privately? Yes. Will they discuss their rights, resources, and options? Yes. Will we report any of this information to the law enforcement or the university? That is a big no. The only time that our advocates will ever work in that kind of a capacity is if a survivor is the one that decides that they would like to report that to the university and or law enforcement, and our advocates work them throughout that process. And then will advocates help and support if I choose to report? Yes. Or choose to not report? Yes. Our advocates are always there and available for any kind of support. So this is something that we in our office like to say is our advocacy wheel, and there's different components throughout our wheel. As you can see, we have reporting, financial, housing, academic, emotional, and medical. And so after someone might experience a traumatic event, a survivor might not know what to do next. And so care promotes access to meaningful services and builds a team of support. And our advocates work with a lot of different campus partners actually to provide these kinds of resources and referrals. And so our advocates often connect students with one resource to another to make sure that they are connected with the appropriate services, and that way they don't have to navigate the university processes and systems alone. And our main priority is that helping the survivor get the resources and help them continue with their education here at UCSB. And so I just want to quickly touch on each of these and provide you a few examples as to what kind of resources are available for each of these kind of areas. And so for emotional, our advocates are there for believing, supporting, and validating those the survivor. We have support groups and different healing programs. And actually, in a second, I can let Monique share a little bit about the different kinds of healing programs that we offer through CARE. And then we also can connect folks with CAPS with different kinds of counseling and support programs. For housing, that could look like getting an accommodation for changing residence halls or even changing their housing location in general, which typically goes a little bit with safety planning. For financial resources and accommodations, we can help with court costs, potentially therapy bills and medical support. We also have a care survivor fund. For medical, that could look like seeking STI testing or even medical exams. And for academic, it could look like asking for extensions, changing class schedules, rescheduling exams. And then reporting could be deciding to report to the university or law enforcement, not reporting at all, or even anonymously reporting. And again, these are just an array of different things that our advocates can work with a survivor with and explain this more thoroughly than what Monique and I are going to currently do. But let's just kind of touch on each of those areas. And actually, real quickly, Monique, can you speak a little bit about some of the healing programs that we have?
Yeah. So within CARE, we offer so far 2 healing programs. The first one is an anonymous online platform where survivors can engage in education surrounding the survivor experience. So we really created this platform to build community among survivors and provide a space where survivors can share their experiences without having to, detail what happened to them. So they might want to share, I'm feeling, sad right now, or I'm feeling unmotivated to do classes right now. And chances are someone in that forum will be feeling the exact same way. So it's providing a point of connection. And then there's also some educational pieces surrounding that online platform. So a survivor will be able to go to Survivors Connect and kind of learn a little bit about the neurobiology behind the science, or the science behind the survivorship. And we are in collaboration with CAPS for that program. So essentially, we always have a CAPS therapist, a care advocate, as well as myself monitor the chat. So it's confidential, it's free, and survivors can use it whenever and however they'd like. And then our new exciting healing program that we have is actually led by our healing peer, Naomi. And a few of you, some of you, if we do some collaborations in the future, you might want to do some healing programs, and Sven will talk about that. We'll talk about that later on in the presentation. But Naomi is working on a 6-week creative healing workshop in which survivors can explore healing through journaling, through art therapy, through vision boarding, and it's called Let's Start with Art. She is in the final stages of getting everything ready to go, so be on the lookout for your email or for our Instagram to learn more about how you can possibly be involved with Let's Start in Art, how you can be involved with Let's Start with Art, or you can refer, a loved one or a friend to that program as well.
Thanks, Monique. So a little bit of information about fall quarter and the services for advocacy heading into this academic year. Care appointments are available over telephone or Zoom, and our care advocates are available for in-person accompaniment services when a client needs to access any processes that might be related to reporting medical needs or safety planning. And we will strive to accommodate the preferences of that individual, but the best way to access care services is to call our 24/7 advocacy line.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and transition on to discussing what is interpersonal violence. And we're going to define basically what each component of interpersonal violence is. And then, of course, we'll define the umbrella term of IPV. So you might be hearing me say IPV, interpersonal violence. Those two are interchangeable. During this section, we will also be asking for participation in the form of breakout rooms, using the chat feature. And then, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or use the raise hand feature. I'm working on my laptop, so I might not be able to see you. And I see that we have 67 on the call, which is awesome, 67 folks on the call. So if you raise your hand and I don't pause to get to you, just say, hey, Monique, I have a question. This is definitely a safe space. Don't feel like, you can't ask any questions, and don't feel like there, are any dumb questions or anything. The only dumb question is the one that's not asked. Okay. So interpersonal violence. So interpersonal violence, or IPV, is the umbrella term used to refer to sexual assault, relationship violence, and stalking. So sexual assault is any unwanted physical or sexual contact that is not consented to. So that's really, really big component to not only sexual assault, but any aspects within interpersonal violence, is that these actions and behaviors are not consented to. Relationship violence is behavior that happens within a relationship and is characterized by one partner or partners, because I understand some folks might, be in poly relationships or the like. So they're using a pattern of behaviors to gain and maintain power and control over the other person or persons. And sometimes you might hear within this field of prevention, dating violence or intimate partner violence. Our office uses relationship violence because we understand that, someone might be in an intimate romantic relationship, but relationship violence can also occur, on a friend level. It can also occur on a family level as well. So that's why we use relationship violence. And then stalking is when a person repeatedly engages in conduct directed at a specific person that places that person in reasonable fear or safety for their safety or concerns for others. So we're going to start our conversation off with first discussing what is relationship violence. So relationship violence is a pattern of behaviors that is used to establish power and control. So that's going to be a really, really big piece when discussing relationship violence, right? And how might a person assert power within a relationship, within an abusive relationship? So that can be within, humiliation, limiting independence. So, telling the partner, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't wear this, you can't wear that. Don't talk to that person. Don't talk to this person. Don't post on your social medias. Don't do something because I don't want you to do it. Coercion and threats. So that is, it can be direct threats. It can be, threats to family members or to friends or to loved ones. And then there's economic abuse. This is a really, really big point to take note of within couples that might be cohabitating, or friends that might be roommates that might be cohabitating. So in this type of power and dominance, the harm doer is maybe preventing their partner, their friend from going to work, right? So maybe standing in front of the door, hiding someone's keys, maybe having the person call in sick to work because they want you to stay, but doing it in a malicious and fearful way. And then, of course, if there's kids involved or if maybe there's pets involved, that can be another form of economic abuse or intimidation or coercion. So then there's emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing. Oh, a garbage person truck just passed my car. So I'm past my house. So I apologize about the background noise. But then there's minimizing, denying, and blaming. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when it comes to gaslighting within relationships. And then, of course, using dominance and privilege. So I want to ask you all you can unmute yourself, you can post in the chat. What are some things that might tell you that someone is experiencing an abusive relationship? And feel free to unmute yourself and then post in the chat. I have my chat up. So thinking about how we talked about how someone might assert power through like humiliation, using coercion. Perfect. I have someone already starting it off. So we have Hannah. They mentioned they start to isolate themselves from friends and family. Yes, definitely. That's a really, really big one within relationships, right? So they might not go out as much as they used to, or they might, skip family dinners, having to ask permission to do anything. They do everything their partner tells them to do. Yes. We'll go ahead and have a few more answers. I know we're Wednesday, some folks might be tired. They stop being as open or communicative as they usually are. Yes. Yeah. And that goes hand in hand with that isolation piece, right? So maybe your friend who used to text you every single day is not texting you that often. They're worried about their partner's perception about them more than their own perception of self-safety and well-being. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's important to know that all of these things that y'all have mentioned, it's all rooted in fear, right? So when talking about like isolating themselves with friends and family, of course, if you're in a new relationship, you might want to spend so much time. You might want to spend so much time with your partner, right? You can't get enough of them because you just want to be embraced in them. And that's, of course, that's something that you want to do. You're not being coerced, you're not being forced, you're not, there's no fear into that. And you're still communicating with your friends, you're still communicating with your family. But it starts to change abusive once there's fear involved, once there's power, control, and dominance involved. Okay, and then on the next slide, we just have a few more examples of what this could look like. So not letting them go to class or study, so that can be a form of coercion. It can even tie in with economic abuse, right? Y'all are here to study, y'all are here to get a degree, which in turn leads to you getting a job, right? So if you're not going to class or studying, then that's going to lessen your chances of graduating, which means, that could lessen your chances of getting particular jobs that you might want. Stopping them from being involved with their fraternity, their sorority, or their student org. So that goes back to that isolation that someone mentioned. Threatening to transfer or drop out of school, forcing them to stay together over break periods. So if you want to go visit your family or your friends and your partner is saying, no, you should stay with me, or guilting you to stay with them over the break, that's definitely a big red flag. And then I want to also point out some kind of like social, some technological forms of red flags. So monitoring their location via social media, GPS. So I know Snapchat, if folks still use that, there is a function where you can see where people are located. Even on Instagram, you can geotag your location, right? And maybe that person or that partner, that harm doer might be like, oh, I see that you're at Woodstocks. Why are you at Woodstocks? You should be here at home with me. And then blackmailing them with information, downplaying and normalizing abuse. And then we have the more serious ones that come in the form of physical and sexual violence. So here we have the cycle of violence. And we see that it starts off, there's tension building, there's violence, and then honeymoon. So it actually starts off in the honeymoon phase, right? Everything is fine. You're so happy, you're in love, and you can't get enough of your partner. Now, in a healthy relationship, of course, there's going to be some, maybe some communication that you have to work on. Maybe there's going to be some things that you get annoyed with on your partner or your friend. They leave the toilet seat up. I hate when that happens, right? Or they don't take out the trash, or, whatever the case may be. But through communication, you can work through it, right? And then you're no longer upset. And you can move on from that. However, in an abusive relationship, we have the tension building phase. So that's when everything can possibly set your partner, or your friend, or your family, or your loved one. Anything can set that person off. And it's kind of like a bottle. Think of a bottle that has, I don't know if y'all are familiar with those videos where people are putting Mentos in soda bottles. So think of the tension building phase as that carbonated, maybe Pepsi, or that carbonated Dr. Pepper or something. And it's just building, right? The carbonation is building and building and building. And then the next phase is violence, right? So violence would be when you put that Mento in the bottle and then all of a sudden it explodes and it gets everywhere. And, you're drenched in all of this soda, right? Now, of course, that is a very lighthearted analogy. In the case of this cycle of violence, violence can erupt in the form of the gaslighting. Violence can erupt in the form of physical, sexual, it can be emotional abuse. It could be abuse that is geared towards other people or directed at other loved ones. Because that harm doer might know that that's how they can push your buttons. And this cycle of violence keeps going on and on. So after that violent stage, they might say, the harm doer might say, I'm so sorry, like, I won't do this again. Or, you just make me so angry sometimes. If you didn't do this, then I would be happier, stuff like that. And then it would just keep going and going and going. And then at the circle, in the center of this cycle of violence is love, for your partner or for your friend or for your loved one, hope that maybe the relationship can get better, And then it's all rooted in fear. So what makes it difficult to leave a relationship? It's always easier said than done, especially if you're on the outside and if you haven't experienced an abusive relationship. But some of the things that make it difficult for someone to leave that abusive relationship: fear, right? So maybe fear of them stalking you, maybe fear of harassment, fear of physical violence. Denial. So denial can be like, oh, it's not that bad. Or, oh, maybe, you know, he doesn't do it that often. They don't do it that often. She doesn't do it that often. Victim blaming, which is a really big piece, concept, not concept, but a really big bad problem within society. Social norms, gender norms, cultural, religious factors, love and attachment, lack of support or options. So that goes hand in hand with isolation. So if you are isolated from your loved ones, maybe you might not be able to leave because you don't have anyone else to turn to, or you don't think you have anyone else to turn to. As well as guilt. Yes, definitely. They might feel guilty for leaving because the harm doer might say, well, if you leave, I will drop out of school. If you leave, then I'm not going to be happy. If you leave, then who's going to take care of the dog? Who's going to take care of the fish, right? So that guilt can go into that. And then we have financial dependence, immigration status. That is a really big piece that prevents survivors from leaving relationships, abusive relationships. And then gaslighting. So gaslighting is essentially, it's a tactic used to destabilize a victim's understanding or a survivor's understanding of reality. So making them constantly question their own experiences, right? And that comes in the form of, you know, actively discrediting. So the harm doer might say, oh, you're too sensitive, or you never remember things correctly, or you don't even know what abuse is. I've heard that last piece, that last part so many different times, of like, you don't even know what abuse is. Or some people might say like, well, I didn't hit you, so I didn't abuse you, right? And of course, we know that emotional abuse is a harmful and very impactful form of abuse. Dismissing blame or reality. So why do you always have to bring that up? I worked all day, I went to school all day, I don't want to deal with this nonsense right now, right? And then playing victim and role reversal. So you always make me out to be the bad person. You're constantly bringing stuff up like that makes me feel bad. So those are just some examples of what gaslighting is, and it definitely makes it very difficult to leave an abusive relationship because the survivor or the person who is being harmed thinks that maybe they're to blame for what's going on.
So now we're going to transition and discuss a little bit about sexual assault. And oftentimes we hear a lot of different dominant stories that exist about sexual assault. And we have a few listed on the screen here, but victim blaming. Oftentimes we hear people talk about, oh, what were they wearing? Or you shouldn't have been wearing that. They shouldn't have been drinking too much. But again, that's all victim blaming. That's not actually getting to the person who is causing that harm. That's not getting to the root of the issue, which is somebody was exerting power and control over someone else. It should never be the fault of that individual because of what they were wearing, right? Like they weren't doing anything wrong to begin with. The person who caused that harm is the one who should be held accountable. Dangerous stranger. So statistically speaking, more often than not, a perpetrator is someone that a survivor does know. And so, yes, that there are instances where a survivor might have experienced a sexual assault from someone that they do not know, but more often than not, someone typically does know the person who had caused them harm. This issue doesn't apply to me. Attributing sexual violence to an individual rather than all the different various systems that allow it to happen in the first place. And so whether that's in settings where people are pushing a lot of substances on other people, and that system itself is allowing that to happen and that behavior to happen itself, and that this isn't just like one certain group experiences sexual violence. Like there's many different systems that allow it to happen in the first place. Then sexual violence is a misunderstanding. Perpetrators are going to intentionally target someone that is in a more vulnerable position. And that's because that's rooted in that power and control, and somebody using, whether that is their power, they could be threatening, they might use intimidation towards someone, at which they might try to isolate them, especially if they're with a group of people. But they also might target someone specifically just because of someone's degree of intoxication, and they might push substances on that person to have them be in a more vulnerable position. And all of those are the myths, and the reality is that we shouldn't, like, victim blaming should not be a thing. More often than not, someone is going to know who the perpetrator. There's various systems that allow it to happen in the first place, and that perpetrators will intentionally target people that are in a more vulnerable position. So affirmative consent, I think everybody should be aware of what affirmative consent, but it's the responsibility of each individual person involved in that sexual activity to ensure that they've engaged and received and asked for affirmative consent of the other parties that they are engaged with in that sexual activity. And so, did anyone say no? That's not what we should be asking. The question should be asking, did everyone say yes? Yes means yes, affirmative consent. So what are some key aspects of consent? Here we're going to watch, I personally think this is one of the better videos on consent that are out there. And this has actually been recorded and developed by a group of students at New York University. If this is actually, the consent videos are something that I've been looking to create with our own student body for a couple of years since I've started this position. And so that's one way that you could engage with us, is if you'd be interested in recreating something like this with us, with our student voices, then please feel free to reach out to myself and Monique, and we can figure out how to set that up. But we're going to watch this little video and then we're going to talk about it a little bit.
We should talk.
I want to talk about
We need to talk about consent.
Which may seem hard. It's not really everybody's favorite subject.
It's not really a sexy word.
I don't feel like I used it a lot. Like we're getting something notarized.
It sounds very formal.
Sign here, here, and here. Something you hear in the news.
But we should be talking about it.
Because this
And initial 3 times here.
is the wrong way to think about it.
Consent is more than just a legal term. It's not a box to check or something to get out of the way.
It's about respect and listening.
It's communicating openly.
And it's how to have good sex.
I'd like to talk about that.
Really good sex.
I vote we talk about that.
And we will. But first, let's get some things clear.
Consent means you have ownership over your own body.
You have agency.
All the time. And nothing can ever change that. Not what you wear, not what you've been drinking.
Not where you are or what time it is.
Nothing.
Consent is something you own and share.
And you always have the right to choose what you share.
Just because you give consent to one thing doesn't mean that somebody has full reign of your body.
And you can always change your mind.
If you don't like what's happening anymore, it's perfectly fine to stop.
Peace out. Gotta go.
You don't owe anyone anything.
And it's okay to say no to some things and yes to others.
Communicating ensures that everybody is safe and feels respected.
It's also the key to great sex.
Because sex should be good.
And good sex is great.
Like really, really great.
You feel good about it the next day
Clouds opening up.
and the day after that.
And you're completely in tune with the other person.
I'll do that again. I'll do that again right now.
So how do we do that?
How do you know you have consent? You gotta pay attention.
Sometimes it's verbal.
Yes.
No.
Those are pretty clear-cut.
Sometimes it's physical. You're really vibing with someone.
Returning loving touches.
Guiding each other.
Reciprocating.
Communicate with your partner.
Or partners.
Right. Communicate with them about what you like or don't like.
How are you feeling? How are they feeling?
Do they seem conflicted, uncomfortable, or tense, or even scared? Check in.
And if you're not sure, ask.
Is this okay?
Can I do this?
If not, they'll be glad you asked.
Because that's kind of sexy, actually.
Help your partner by being clear about your consent as well.
I don't want that.
Why don't we try something else?
Let's stop.
You don't have to feel shy or worried about what they'll think.
No one wants to have bad sex.
So guide them, let them know what you like.
And if you don't know, you could find out together.
Being open and building trust can help you try new things.
And new things can be very fun.
Ask him.
Ask her.
Ask them.
And listen, if you take care of them, they can take care of you.
And it's pretty nice to be taken care of.
Consent is mutual communication.
If it's not mutual, or if your partner cannot communicate
Actively.
Because they're asleep or passed out.
If they're intoxicated or high,
Then that's not consent.
end of story.
Your standards for sex can and should be higher than just not a felony.
Find out what consent means to you and your partner.
know what you need to feel comfortable and to enjoy sex.
Make sure your partner respects that.
And that you respect your partner.
Consent is not just a question of legality.
Not just who has permission to do what.
It's the basis for a healthy and happy sex life.
Whether you're having sex or not.
And it's okay if you are.
And it's okay if you're not.
Everybody's okay.
The only thing that's not okay is someone else making that choice for you.
If you have any questions.
So just a very quick, brief summary. So what is affirmative consent? Affirmative, that loud, resounding yes. It's ongoing. It's not something that is just at the very beginning. And then like that's the only time you ever inquire or ask and communicate about consent. Whether it's at the beginning of the night, like throughout the entire or any time of the day, right? It's just continuous and it's ongoing. It's not just like a single point in time that somebody needs to consent to something. It's voluntary, and that means that it's like free of coercion, threats, or intimidation. Both all parties are conscious, meaning that, like they said in the video, they're not intoxicated or high. And then revocable, right? Anybody can revoke consent at any point in time, right? Because we all have agency over our own lives and our own bodies. And so that's the other key aspect of it. And then affirmative consent is only possible when there is equal power. And that all stems from openly communicating and asking, what do you like? What do you not like? Do you like this? Do you like, what would you like me to do? Like, that's another affirmative way of asking for consent. Oops, sorry about that. Stalking. So I just want to pose a quick question to the audience, and you can put this into the chat. You can unmute yourself and say it out loud, but what does stalking look like? And I put that out there broadly, you know, if you can put some warning signs that you might think of in the chat, but also I want y'all to think of what are some examples of stalking that you might have seen on media. So that could be television, movies, social media, more broadly, just like what are some examples that you might be able to notice or that you have seen before? Unwanted frequent attention, repeated text messages, consistent following. Yeah, those are good ones. Unwanted communication after repeated request demands to stop, like a paparazzi. That's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that, B. Constantly checking social media status and or location. Are there any media shows, whether or TV or movies, that folks can think of that romanticize and that have actually created a big educational problem for myself or Monique? Yes, you, the Netflix series, heavily dramatized and romanticized stalking. And I remember when it first came out a few years, I think they're on season 3 now. They came out with season 1 a few years ago, and I was utterly shocked at the fact that it was something that was actually created. Following others physically and digitally without their consent, contacting friends or family or that other person. Yep. And then also, if you check out our Instagram page, our former peer educator who also ran our social media platform and all of our social media content back in January and February, created a bunch of different posts all about stalking within the media. And I believe Shamali used what? I think it was The Notebook, Twilight. And those were a couple of examples. And then you, obviously, for romanticizing stalking. But so there's two different kinds of behaviors that are on here. At the top, we have something for new relationship behaviors, and at the bottom, we have stalking behaviors. And if you notice, these are basically the same kinds of behaviors between the two. And so my question for you all is, like, what's the difference between something that is a healthy new relationship behavior versus something that's harmful, like these stalking behaviors? What is that? What's that difference? Intent of control versus love and affection. One is consensual, the other one is not. Right. Nailed it on the head. It's all about consent. One is reciprocated and the other one isn't. And then real quickly, how is stalking connected to dating violence, relationship violence, and sexual assault? And so oftentimes somebody who's caused that harm or a perpetrator will contact a survivor after an assault or after they might leave in an abusive relationship. And that's all because, again, it's all rooted in that power and control and trying to cause fear within someone else and to make them feel unsafe. And so that may look like somebody seeking to intimidate, threaten, or silence someone, because if the survivor speaks out, then that person's probably going to be held accountable. And so they'll try to do anything they can to get that person to not say anything. They might try to act as if nothing is wrong whatsoever and or blame the survivor, which gets into a little bit of that gaslighting that Monique was talking about earlier. And a perpetrator might contact mutual friends to invalidate, gaslight the story and the experience of that survivor, right? Because that person might be like the survivor might know that perpetrator and they might be part of the same friend group. And so that perpetrator might try to start a rumor and gaslight the whole experience of that survivor. And so those are the different ways that they're connected. Ruin credibility. Yes.
So now that we've talked about the different types of interpersonal violence, let's talk about a little bit more about the impacts that IPV has on an individual and in a community. So on the individual level, trauma manifests itself in so many different ways, right? So at the top, we have cognitive. So that's maybe concentration, decision-making, memory. So maybe a survivor might not be able to concentrate as much in class as they used to, or maybe they're making rash decisions, maybe they're making irrational decisions, and they didn't used to do that before. Physical health, this one is a little bit easier to spot in a survivor in terms of impacts, because you can physically see injuries. You can physically, maybe the person might look tired, so there might be like those sleep disturbances. Of course, the survivor might also be tired because they're a student, but with all of these impacts, it's always okay to ask and check in with the survivor and say, hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? Do you need support? There might be, maybe some substance use or substance abuse that has increased in frequency since the experience of IPV. Mental and emotional well-being, depression and PTSD go hand in hand with trauma that manifests within survivors. Suicidal ideations, maybe flashbacks, guilt and self-blame. And then social, we talked a lot about isolation and how power and control or a person asserting dominance within a relationship might isolate that survivor from their family. So this is where the social comes in. So they might be changing their social life. So they might isolate themselves from their friends, their family. There might be more increased conflict with their friends and family and loved ones. They might not trust folks as much as they used to. They might lose motivation for the activities that they used to be passionate about. So let's say they're in a sorority or in a fraternity, and they have this experience of interpersonal violence. They might not want to be as active in that sorority or fraternity or student organization as they used to. And then on a community level, there's retention risk. There's loss of productivity and engagement. The trust and safety within the communities is disrupted, right? So this space has been infiltrated because of the power and control dynamics, because of victim blaming comments, because of all of these different forms of violence or harm that's saying it's okay. So that trust and that safety bubble has been disrupted. Secondary harm to others, loss of sense of belonging. That one's extremely important to recognize, especially if, let's say, Sven mentioned earlier that maybe the harm doer is a part of the friend group, right? And maybe the friends aren't, ceasing contact, or maybe they might still be friends with the harm doer. So the survivor might be like, wait, where do I belong? I don't have any other friends. Y'all are my friend group. And then sense that violence and abuse is accepted. And then, of course, associates the campus with trauma. And then we can dig a little bit deeper into this and specifically talk about how trauma manifests within college students, right? So as I mentioned before, difficulty focusing, attending, retaining, and recalling information, maybe avoidance and the tendency to miss a lot of meetings. So y'all have weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings for your organizations, for your commissions, your committees. And maybe you might notice that someone has been missing meetings a lot. That might be a moment where you check in with that person and say, hey, I just want to check in, see how you're doing. I noticed that you missed Monday's meeting. Is there anything I can help you with? Challenges with regulating emotions. So maybe the survivor trauma might manifest in them maybe by being more aggressive or more angry, or even being maybe more emotional in terms of sadness. Maybe they might be crying a lot, or maybe they might not have any emotions whatsoever, right? So trauma can manifest in a survivor. They might be laughing and giggling and having a good old time, even though they experienced this harmful situation. So a behavior or the emotion that a survivor exhibits is different in every single survivor. Fear of taking risks, anxiety about deadlines, group work, or public speaking, anger, withdrawal, and isolation. We're noticing a lot of that withdrawal and isolation. That's really, really important, especially during COVID. A lot of folks were isolated from their friends and their family and support and loved ones because they were still in the home with the harm doer. And it's going to look a lot different now that we're coming back to campus, right? Because now we have folks in the dorms or in the residence halls, and we have folks in apartment buildings, and then of course on campus within the class setting. And then of course, involvement in unhealthy relationships and that dynamics. And it's important to note that all of these things, CARE is able to support a survivor work through any of these bullet points that we see on the screen. And now I also want to talk about compounding trauma and how it's extremely important to recognize, especially for survivors that might have intersectional identities, right? So for me, for example, I identify as a African-American woman, and I have different traumas that come from that identity. But then I also have different traumas coming from being a woman of color, from being a survivor. And this is what we call compounding trauma. Now I'm going to read this quote. It is from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in her account of the US Capitol riots that happened back in January. There is a link posted. If you haven't had the time to watch that, I would definitely suggest watching it. Just content warning though, she does disclose her own instance with abuse, her own instance with trauma. So take the time and support that you need when you're watching that video, if you decide to watch it. So she says, I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and I haven't told many people that in my life. But when we go through trauma compounds on top of each other. And so whether you experience any sort of trauma in your life, small to large, these episodes compile onto one another, right? So these experiences are just compounding and piling up and piling up and piling up. And it has larger impacts for survivors with intersectional identities. And then that kind of ties into our next slide, where we talk a little bit about barriers to accessing survivor support. So all survivors, of course, are able to, or should be able to, receive support when they experience any form of interpersonal violence. However, survivors with from marginalized communities, they might encounter several obstacles and barriers when attempting to access these forms of support. And that's if they're even able to access them at all. So there might be a lack of resources within that community. There might be a lack of knowledge of resources in certain communities. So what we're going to do for this portion, we're going to break y'all up into breakout rooms in about groups of 5 to 10 people. And we're going to talk about, from 4 to 5 minutes, what are some barriers to accessing support that survivors with intersectional identities may encounter. Okay. And some examples, could be not being believed or minimization of experiences. This is survivors that are engaged in sex work, for example. This is a really, really big fear and barrier that they have when they're trying to access support, because, they might be criticized for their profession. They might not be believed. So that's one example. So I want y'all to just brainstorm and talk about some barriers, and we will come back and debrief in about 4 to 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone.
Oh, hello. Okay. So does anyone want to share what they talked about within their group about some potential barriers? Feel free to unmute yourself. I want to hear your voices.
Could be as simple as just not having the knowledge of the resources, not knowing that they exist.
Yeah, that's really big. And we see that even on our campus, right? Not a lot of folks know what care is. A lot of times we get lumped together with Title IX, and we're completely different offices. And then within the community, maybe folks from marginalized communities might not know that there is a local rape crisis center called STESA. And then I see B, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I had my hand raised. I wanted to say that I feel like the barriers in accessing support for survivors is just, like you were saying, compounded with your identity. I was going to say, as a Black woman, I'm often questioned in everything that I do. People ask me, "Are you sure? Is that what happened? I think you're wrong. Can you clarify?" And when reporting, I can only imagine what someone would go through when they're trying to say their side of the story, and often survivors are not believed. And the blame is placed on them, even with just reporting an incident to UCPD. One time I was asked, why was I standing there? Why didn't I call them sooner? Just for a simple report, not related to sexual assault or any interpersonal violence, but I was still questioned. After I told them who I was and what I looked like. And it made me realize that this is a barrier in me seeking support, even from law enforcement. And so I know that's a little bit separate, but and it's not care, but still there's just barriers in even accessing, resources to find support. So thank you for the space.
Yeah. And B, I'm definitely, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your experience. And I would say that it does go hand in hand with what we do at CARE, right? Like the experience that you faced, and a lot of folks who are in your similar situation have faced, 9 times out of 10, they probably face that if they're a survivor as well, right? And it is really unfortunate that these interactions with law enforcement and even medical professionals, are very victim blaming, are very, well, what did you do? What were you wearing? How much did you drink? And the good thing is that there are organizations that are out there that we'll talk a little bit more about what trauma-informed care is, but a lot of organizations such as CARE, such as STESA is Standing Together to End Sexual Assault, domestic violence shelter within the community. We really use trauma-informed care because we are trying to get away from, why did this happen to you, to, okay, what happened to you and how can we support you? So language is a really, 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 really big aspect of trauma-informed care. And we try to stay away from those questions of like, well, why, what, and direct it more towards how can I help? How are you feeling? And then Of course, there's a whole bunch of complications and intricacies that go into reporting, but we can definitely discuss that, and anyone on this call, outside of this space if you're interested in. Does anyone else want to share anything before we move on to the next section? Maria, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted kind of to add on something about the lines along law enforcement. Definitely when I'm undocumented, so I would feel, if I were put in that position, I wouldn't feel safe going to the authorities, just because there is that fear of, will they help me, or will they instead question me? And also because I have that immigration status, it's like, how is that going to affect my chances of staying in this country? So I think that's like another barrier that I feel like a lot of people do and can relate to.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that, and once again being vulnerable in the space. Immigration status is for sure a huge barrier that undocumented survivors have to experience, and not only undocumented survivors, but maybe their family that are undocumented, right? And their family might have experienced some form of harm, and then that's that added extra layer of, okay, are they going to be penalized for their status? There are organizations in the community, such as Legal Aid Foundation, that support undocumented survivors. Of course, there is Undocumented Student Services here on campus that support undocumented survivors. You're more than welcome to reach out to them. You can reach out to CARE, and we can kind of be that liaison to provide support for maybe if you're impacted, or if you have loved ones that are impacted or indirectly impacted. So go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Sven. So all of these experiences, right? So the different forms of interpersonal violence, the impact that interpersonal violence has on someone, how trauma manifests, and how compounding trauma and how one's survivorship is based off of their intersectional identities, it all requires a specialized reaction to them. And that's where we have trauma-informed spaces.
Sorry, I was muted. So we're going to take a little deeper dive into trauma-informed care and how that's used to support survivors of interpersonal violence, but also just like how can we ultimately create spaces that are just always trauma-informed and all the different intricacies. Afterwards, Monique and I are going to make sure that we share not only the PowerPoint slides with Holly, so that way she can share them with everyone, but as well as a handout all on facilitating trauma-informed spaces. And whenever you're holding meetings or when the commissions or the committees are meeting in public spaces, it's just kind of a step, not necessarily a step-by-step guide, but just lists out the things to think about and to take note of when you are creating these different kinds of spaces. And so, and something I do want to mention a little bit about is just along with a trauma-informed space comes with bystander intervention and some form of accountability. And when we're trying to create these spaces, like it's important for us to take into account like what is the culture and the values of our organization, and what are we trying to establish? I've been often saying throughout the trainings that Monique and I have been doing for the past couple of weeks that we have an incredibly unique opportunity on our campus where there's basically 2.5, 3 years worth of students who haven't really been here on campus and within the community. And so this is a huge opportunity for us as a community ourselves to figure out what are the things that we value and that we do care for, and that what are those norms that we want even within our associated students and our committees and our commissions. And so that can kind of come into accountability and trying to figure out, you know, if somebody is saying victim blaming comments, or if somebody is saying something offhand and not really thinking about what they had just said, holding somebody accountable and calling them out and bringing them into the space and letting folks know like why what they may have said might actually be like re-traumatizing for people that could be around, just because it could be and activating like comments that may have happened.
Okay, so trauma-informed care. So this is a very, very like basic overview. There's so much research on trauma-informed care. A lot of the research is geared towards trauma-informed care within K through 12, trauma-informed care within medical settings, so like hospitals, clinics, but organizations like CARE, other rape crisis centers, support services centers are adapting this trauma-informed care to fit the needs of our college population and our survivors. So here we have the basic tenets of trauma-informed actions. So there's safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. So safety is just that. How do you ensure a safe environment? Not only physical, right, but also emotional. And that's the most fundamental principle, because of course, everyone wants to feel safe when they go into a space, right? Whether they're in a classroom, whether they're in, you know, the AS lounge, or whether they're in, you know, the MCC, because I know y'all have that office in the Multicultural Center building, or even in the SRB, like wherever the location is, of course, you want to feel physically safe. But when you go into those spaces, you also want to feel emotionally safe. You want to be ensured that you're not going to be triggered. You want to, or activated. You want to make sure that you can go into the space and be your whole authentic self without any fear, without any judgment, without any, people just looking down on you or anything like that. Like you want to go into the space feeling safe. So some examples could be like, let's say you're having a meeting, you want to make sure that everyone knows where to find the bathrooms and where drinking fountains are, because bio breaks are necessary, right? You want to make sure that you're providing content warnings or trigger warnings, as I've seen, like, you know, if you're sharing things on social media that are related to interpersonal violence or other forms of harm, content warnings are extremely important, because not only does it help your audience kind of prepare for the content that they're going to be viewing, but it gives a heads up or signaling to survivors to say, please get the support that you need if this information activates you. And here's the support. And then to go along that, if you are sharing anything on your Instagram socials that's related to interpersonal violence, or in your student staff meetings, or even in your programs or events that you're doing that's related to interpersonal violence, always have a list of resources that your survivors can go to at any moment, whether that's CARE, whether that's a local organization, whether it's a national organization such as RAIN. And then make sure that it's, of course, culturally relevant as well. So the needs of an undocumented survivor versus a Black survivor might be a little bit different. And there are organizations that are tailored to specific communities. So that's all about ensuring safety. Trust is when you are being clear, consistent, and transparent about roles, tasks, and boundaries and activities and expectations within the space. So you're providing opportunities for folks to share anonymous feedback when asking about their choices. So I know Zoom has a polling feature. So let's say you can say, when do y'all want to have this meeting, at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? Everyone chooses 2 p.m. You're giving your participants the choice to make their choose that attendance. And then, like, let's say you're setting your meeting time, not your meeting times, your meeting topics. You can give your participants the option to choose what meeting topics you're going to do for that week. Especially like if you wanted to do something on IPV, but folks might be triggered by it or activated by it, then you can try to tailor or revise the content as needed for that particular student meeting. And then, of course, you saw what we did at the beginning of this presentation where we had an agenda. So we're, of course, are trying to stick to that agenda as much as we can. And we're doing that so that we can instill trust in you all, to know that we're not going to just do a curveball and start talking about, you know, what's going on in the media and then, you know, causing someone to be activated, or we're not going to go off topic with regards to what we set on that agenda. So that's some stuff that y'all can do within your own student organization meetings. Then we have choice. Oh, go back for me. No worries, no worries. I know there's a lot. I'm going through each of the tenets, and then we'll go to the next slide. But then there's choice, so recognizing that every person's experience is unique and requires an individualized approach, supporting a survivor or a person in control over their own healing journey. So that ties back into the empowerment model. So you see on the bottom of this slide, the empowerment model, which provides survivors the power to make decisions regarding their healing journey, regarding whatever resources that they want and need. And then we have collaboration. Collaboration is really big because it recognizes that healing happens in relationships. It takes a village to ensure that we're creating a safe, trusting, choice, and empowering environment. And then empowerment, of course, you're identifying each person's individual strengths and experiences. People aren't monoliths. People aren't the same. So you have to meet everyone where they're at in their journey, everyone where they're at in their learning, and then recognize whatever strengths and experiences that they have. And then let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, because I know we are at 12:17. So I do want to be mindful of time. Okay, so why are trauma-informed spaces important? So they increase public awareness of the impact of trauma. They build and strengthen partnerships to prevent and address trauma as a community. So what we're doing right now in this meeting, I'm hoping that we can build a partnership with y'all and associated students, whether it's through your committee, your commission, and we are addressing trauma as a community, so then we can figure out how we can heal together. We're promoting wellness, healing, and resilience. Resilience is so big. We are who we are despite our circumstances, or in spite, or I think there's like a specific phrase where basically you can succeed regardless of what your experiences have been. It better identifies individuals who have experienced trauma and quickly get them connected with the resources. It helps to avoid re-traumatization. So if you're using those content warnings, if you're using bio breaks, which is like bathroom and drinking breaks, self-care, promoting stuff like that, it helps to avoid re-traumatization in the space. And then it helps to decrease burnout and improve services.
In the interest of time, we're gonna actually get past this video, but we're gonna make sure that everybody has the link for this Brene Brown video. And she just talks and discusses about like why these tools and skills are needed to be able to provide a fully robust and holistic trauma-informed response and space.
Yeah, and in that video, she talks a lot about empathy, empathy versus sympathy. And we want to talk about kind of like, what do you need before you're able to practice empathy? Empathy is something that you have to practice. Empathy is something that you have to learn, and it's constantly evolving. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me, Sven. So before you can practice empathy, you have to kind of recognize your own reaction to trauma, right? So a lot of times y'all might be in a space where someone discloses to you. You might be in a space where you see something on social media that's super activating, or there might have been an instance within the organization where there's instances of interpersonal violence. So you have to understand what your own activated state can look and feel like before you can provide support to that survivor. So you ask yourself 4 things. What is my purpose and values, right? Am I emotionally attuned to this person? What is the goal of this interaction, and what emotion am I feeling? So this is all about how to not become trauma reactive, right? Because that's not what the survivor needs in that moment. The survivor needs someone to listen, validate, and support. They don't need someone to ask them all of these questions or pry for unnecessary information. They don't need someone to, obviously support with fire and passion, but sometimes they might not need someone to go grab the pitchfork right away. So you have to make sure that you're in tune with your own reactions so that you can support the survivor. And then, of course, recognizing compassion fatigue, which goes hand in hand with burnout. So compassion fatigue is the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those suffering from consequences of traumatic event. So this goes hand in hand with that compounding trauma that we talked about before. So essentially, you might be hearing disclosure after disclosure. You might be seeing some stuff on social media about, whatever bad stuff. And I'm not going to name the bad stuff, but we all know that is. So we might be seeing that over and over and over again, and the compassion fatigue kicks in, and then we get burned out and we don't want to do our work anymore. We're not motivated to help. We're feeling burdened. Go ahead and go to the next slide for me. So these are some signs of compassion fatigue. So we might feel burdened by the suffering of others. We might isolate ourselves. We might lose pleasure in life for helping others. A lot of y'all, if not all of y'all, are in associated students because you want to be a helping hand. You want to be the face of UCSB and your UCSB committee. You want to provide support to your committee and your commissions and your community. And you can tell you're experiencing compassion fatigue if you're just like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. Or if you're missing your meetings, or if you're feeling irritated, or if you're feeling those moments of hopelessness. So then we did have a breakout room, but of course for time, essentially we wanted to ask y'all, like, how might you react to hearing about trauma when it's unexpected? What are some things you can say to express empathy? And what are some cues of compassion fatigue that you have experienced or observed? This might be some really great questions that you all ask each other within your own peer group and kind of brainstorm some things. Like for point number 1, how might someone react to hearing about trauma when it's unexpected? You can probably say, hey, I see that you are, that you said that you would react this way. Let's brainstorm some ways so that we can react better, so we can support our survivors. So maybe this might be some really great questions that you can ask in your student meetings and commissions. And then we have self-care. Self-care is so important, not only as a student, not only as someone who's an associated student, but just as a human being, self-care is important. We cannot fill from an empty cup. So you have to make sure that you are refilling yourself, recharge. It's not selfish to do some self-gratification. And then there's some examples here, and y'all will get this PowerPoint. So I know that we went through that really fast. I definitely am open to having these conversations about trauma-informed spaces, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Sven so we can talk about where we can go from here and how we can engage with each other.
Thanks, Monique. I know our time is a little bit limited today, but I don't want this to be the only time that we have these kinds of conversations. I want this to be an ongoing and continuous effort when it comes to like this partnership and this collaboration between associated students and the CARE office. And I just want to mention that there's a handful of opportunities for folks to engage with our office in, and I'll just kind of list some of these. So one of the first things is event program collaboration. So Monique and I have a team of peer educators and a healing peer, and they are open and available to provide different sorts of educational programs. If you have like a fun event idea that you're interested in hosting, you can, I'll get to the point, the slide about reaching out and how to do that, but feel free to contact myself or even Monique or submit something through our online scheduling system. Our Violence Intervention and Prevention Internship Program, our VIP internship program, if you've heard about that, last year, Monique and two of our peer educators ran a virtual, I believe it was 5 weeks long. This year, hopefully we're gonna be doing something that's a little bit more, a little bit longer and dives deeper into the different subtopics, because I know there is there are so many different ways that we could have educated people during that internship that it was difficult to choose all the different topic areas. Right now it's to be determined, but we typically hold it in winter quarter or spring quarter, but I'm hoping we'll do it in winter quarter this year. So providing feedback in general, at the end of every presentation, we'll have a QR code. And so please provide us all the kinds of feedback that we can have, whether that's for our prevention education, our peer education programs, or even it's for our advocacy services. We're always looking to improve upon the work that we do for our campus and our community. Our town hall, so I know that SASA, we've been holding quarterly town halls with SASA for, oh my gosh, with the pandemic, I guess it feels like for years now, and I guess it has been for at least 3 years since I've been here, but attending town halls and speaking out about the different topics that are discussed during those moments. So serving on search committees. we are currently in the process of hiring an advocate. And I believe the job posting is going to be closing soon. But if you're interested in playing in some role for this, then feel free to reach out to us and see how we can have you a part of that search committee to help provide some of that student input and insight into what kind of advocates we should be looking for in hiring. The second to last bullet point, so the CARE needs assessment report. CARE across the UC system, every UC campus has a CARE office. So across the system, we just released a needs assessment report for each of the different CARE offices. And I know that our director, Brianna, is going to be looking for different students to join with the implementation team. So if that's also another area of interest for you, then please feel free to reach out to us. Monique, do you mind actually quickly just putting our contact info there? And then there's a lot of different task forces that are available for people. We work alongside all the different organizations and departments for the mental health task force, and it's always vital to be able to get different student input for the different populations in the student populations that we work with. The UC Community Safety Plan. So when the Office of the President released that a few weeks ago, CARE actually plays a role in that plan for campus policing as an alternative resource to reporting and ensuring that survivors are met with respect within that criminal justice system. And so if you actually see the safety plan that President Drake came out with, we're listed under like the tiered holistic response services. And so we will have a big role within that. And we're going to be definitely looking for students to be able to provide their insight and provide some input. And then every year, typically, the UCOP Title IX office is always looking for students to serve on their student advisory board. If I'm not mistaken, it's a paid position, but if you want to be able to systematically provide some input and some insight to change things systematically, that is a huge way to be able to do that. And so basically, all these different areas are beneficial for our campus community because it's going to be able to improve upon the services and the education that our community gets and the services that our survivors receive. And so we'd love to be able to see folks engage with us throughout this year and onwards. Lastly, did you copy and paste this in the chat? Is that what that was? Ah, thanks. This is how you can contact us. So on the left-hand side, we have Survivor Advocacy Services. That is our 24/7 line. And then on the bottom, that is our how to make an appointment. And then that is the link on the right-hand side for how to request a workshop. We have an array of different workshops that we've been creating and developing and enhancing throughout the years to make them relevant and effective for our own campus community. And just the other way that you can reach out to us is through that email address. And last but not least, we have a survey for everyone. That's a QR code. I'm going to post the link in the chat, but thank you all so much for being with us today and inviting us into this space. I'm so looking forward to this academic year and all the different opportunities for engagement that are available for us. And I hope that, again, this isn't the only time that we do have this conversation and we do collaborate. I hope this is an ongoing thing and that we're here for you for anything that you may need. Monique?
Yeah, I second everything that you said. Definitely don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to do some event collaboration. If you're interested in those other opportunities, like serving on advisory boards or helping out with hiring, like please reach out to us. We really want to establish and maintain a partnership and community with you all.
Thank you both so much. Sorry.
No, I was just passing it on to you.
No, it's all good. Thank you so much for presenting today. I wanted to ask if before we take our lunch break, are there any questions for Sven or Monique? Seeing any? So just again, thank you so much for your time and your presentation. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today for your attention and your engagement. Very much appreciate it. And if there are no other questions or comments, then we are going to conclude for right now and take our lunch break. And I will see you all at 1 p.m. for our next session.